You guys can have a seat. But really quick, let's go ahead and praise God and let's thank our worship band. Our worship is something that I'm kind of the most proud about, even though I have nothing to do with the worship. It is something that we value on Sunday nights. And so freshmen, it's a change. If you've been coming to middle school for Amplify on Wednesday nights, now moving to Sunday nights, a new night of the week. But the other thing that we do is we really want to value time together. So we have a meal together. We have fun together, games and all that. We also have a chance to worship our God, and that's what we do every Sunday night. And then we end with some time of teaching. We want to be able to equip you, to challenge you. And tonight we have our very own Dalton McAllister going to share with us.
Thank you.
You got one fan.
I got one fan.
But
Thanks, Mike.
Both Michael and Dalton has been interns this summer, and so Dalton's going to chance to share his week 2 in this. But if you have any questions, he's going to be available afterwards as well during the movie.
I didn't know about
if you
this.
have any questions on that. But one last time, let's give it up for Dalton.
Aw. Thanks, guys. All right, real fast. I made you all do this last time, but we're going to do it again. I need everyone to get as close as you can. So like the girls back there, the 8th graders back there. We kind of like to get close, so get up here in the front. I'll give you 5 seconds. Shelby, that includes you and your whole crew there. Yeah, you guys. But scoot your chair forward. Shelby. Oh my gosh. All right, that'll work. I guess I'll allow you guys to stay there. In the back, whatever. Thank you. See, this is what I like to see. If you want, do what you want. You've been here longer than I have. Do what you want. Sit up here on the stage if you want. I don't care. No, that's actually not an option. Sit down! All right, well, this is weird now. This is awkward. Whatever. Anyways, so I don't like how you're looking at me like that. So last week, if you guys will remember with me, we had Western night, right? How many of you guys are for Western night? A lot of you? Okay, cool. Well, I just want to fill you guys in on something real fast. Standing here before you guys is the mechanical bull riding champion. No, barely? What do you mean barely? What was my number, Carly? What was it? It was 25. And then 21. That was you, right? Or was that Carly? That was So Carly got second place. Good job. I'm still number 1. Anyways, so last week I kind of shared my testimony. If you guys are here, that was kind of fun. We also learned about the beginning of Nehemiah in that kind of area. We talked about how he was presented with forks in the road whenever he's talking to the king, trying to go fix the walls. And stop smiling, dude. And so he's about to go fix the walls. He's talking to the king. He's presented with these forks in the road. And we learned that one thing about Nehemiah that is incredible is his prayer life. So every fork in the road that Nehemiah came to, he prayed about it before he made a decision. We also talked about how we, today, on average, come across about 35,000 forks in the road a day. On average, a human makes about 35,000 decisions per day. And I talked about, could you imagine if we prayed before every single decision that we made? And then my ending point that I wanted you guys to remember was when you're presented with a fork in the road, pray about it. Thank you, Shelby. Thank you. Good job back there. So today we're going to learn more about the story about Nehemiah and the wall. We're going to go through the rest of it really quick, and then we're going to dig in more about Nehemiah's prayer life. So we left off last week. Nehemiah was talking to the king. And he was like, I want to go fix this wall. And the king was like, what do you want me to do about it? And then he sent up a prayer real fast. And then he got granted permission to go fix this wall around Jerusalem. So we're at the point in the story where Nehemiah is sent to inspect these walls. So he headed over there, him and his army. And they stayed around these walls for 3 nights, inspecting these walls, seeing what they could do. So in this chapter, I think it's chapter 4, we learn that Nehemiah names 38 different people and 42 different groups. He names 38 different people and 42 different groups that help him with this project. I'm sure there was a lot more, but there's 38 people named and 42 different groups that help with this project. And together, Nehemiah led these groups to build 10 city gates. This took his crew only 52 days. I don't know about you guys, but Wichita seems to be in construction every day of its life, right? I think there was one time, like not that long ago, where like there was no construction for like a day. I read an article where it was like, wow, Wichita has no construction. Then the next day they started a project on Kellogg. And so they've had one day in the past however many years where there's been no construction. But the length of this wall that Nehemiah built was 2.5 miles long. It was 2.5 miles long. It was 40 feet tall, and the thickness of this wall was 8 feet thick. And they built this thing in 52 days. They didn't have giant cranes or anything. They just had their hands and some tools, I guess like a shovel or whatever. Anyways, so they built this 2.5 mile, 40 feet tall, 8 feet thick wall in 52 days. But these groups and peoples came across some backlash, and this is where Nehemiah had to make a decision. He decided to split the group in half. Half of them were put on the wall to build the wall, and then the other half was put to stand around the wall and defend the wall. He said in chapter 4, 16 through 18, 16 through 8. That says 16 through 18, not 16 through 8. Don't worry. So from that day on, Thanks, Ellie, appreciate it. So from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, coats of mail, and the leader stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other, and each of these builders had a sword strapped at his side while he built. So during this time that the wall was being built and put together, they did this spiritual renewal celebration kind of deal. It was 7 days long, and what they did is they taught the Torah to this group of builders, and they had a celebration to remember God's faithfulness. So if you can imagine, it was kind of like camp. So we go to camp for so many days. We have this kind of spiritual renewal, and we have the spiritual high, and then we're motivated, and we get going. This is kind of what this is like. They offered a confession of their sins. They vow to follow the rules of the Torah, and they vow themselves to renew the covenant. So this was a really high point in this journey. They were still building the wall, but Nehemiah led them into a 7-day spiritual renewal celebration. But shortly after this celebration, things kind of went downhill. See, Nehemiah took a trip around the city walls to see the progress, and what he found made him extremely furious. We see people not fulfilling the covenant vows. The temple's being neglected, and it's being ran by unqualified people. We see that the people are violating the Torah. They're working on the Sabbath. He walks around the walls and see that people have set up markets along the walls, and they're selling and working on the Sabbath. And this makes Nehemiah go on a rampage. He becomes a menace to these people. He starts fighting people. He's pulling out hair. And as a final cry to God, when everything seemed to be falling apart, he said, "Remember me, oh my God, for good." So after all of this work that he put into the city and the wall and all this effort and these trials and triumphs, and after all this preparation with God and with these people, it feels as though everything has fallen apart and all control and every good thing has been lost. So when everything feels lost and out of control, when we start to lose control, that's when our faith is tested the most. So who are you going to turn to in times like these? Are you going to turn to the world, get revenge, curse at these people, make plots against them who did you wrong, or are you going to send up a plea to God? There's a fork in the road. Nehemiah had a fork in the road here. So when everything feels lost and out of control, what path are you going to take? So Nehemiah, if we can remember, was a man of constant prayer. In the short book of Nehemiah, it's recorded that he prays 14 times. But I think it's safe to say, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying that Nehemiah was constantly having communication with God. So what I've done is I've sorted Nehemiah's prayers into 3 different categories that I think are pretty fit, that some of these or all of these can fit in a category. I've sorted them out into 3. But before we get into that, I want to talk about something that maybe might be kind of deep for some of us. The question is, what happens when we don't pray? Or what happens in our spiritual life when our prayer life is suffering? See, James 4, 1-5 says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask wrongly, to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." Wow. Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says, "He yearns jealously over the spirit that he has made to dwell in us"? So what James is saying is that we don't have what we want, so we covet and even fight, and we get what we want on our own terms. Instead of giving our wants and our desires to God, we decide we're going to take them ourselves. Whether that's physical objects, mental desires like lust and jealousy, whatever it is, instead of giving those desires and wants to God, we try to play God and take them for ourselves. But what happens when we don't ask? What happens when we don't ask God? It says right here in the end of verse 2, "You do not have because you do not ask." If you want something, you have to ask God, just like Nehemiah wanted the king to let him go to these walls to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He asked him. I'm going to read this verse. I don't have it on the screen because it's kind of lengthy. But it says in Nehemiah 1, 5-11, this is Nehemiah asking God to help him. "And I said, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants. Confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you, even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you command your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples, but if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen to make my name dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name. And give success to your servant today and grant him mercy in the sight of this man." That was Nehemiah's prayer when he was going to talk to the king. Personally, when my prayer life is suffering, when my prayer life is going downhill, I feel disconnected from God. I feel far away from him. I feel as though God doesn't love me, but in reality, I'm not doing my end, like my job on my end of the thing. If you want to feel closer to God, then you have to talk to him. So last week, I showed a picture of my family, and and you guys got to meet Danny, my girlfriend. So when we first met, I was in Enid, Oklahoma, and she was in Hillsborough, Kansas. It's about a 2-hour and 45-minute drive-ish. I could probably make it in 2:30 if I was going quick enough. But we were about 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes away, and we hardly ever got to see each other. So we relied so heavily on communication to keep our relationship up. We relied so heavily on phone calls, on text messages, to the point where if we didn't talk in a day, it wouldn't kill us, but it would make us feel bad inside. It would make us feel like the other person didn't love us. It would make us feel kind of empty and disconnected. But on the days when we weren't too busy to talk to each other, when we found time to talk to each other throughout the day, we felt close, both felt loved, and we were happy. Constant communication with God is so important. So, we're getting back to our 3 categories that I put Nehemiah's prayers in. And the first one is, so the title of this message is called Tools of the Trade, because I'm going to give you 3 tools that are going to help you in a successful prayer life thingy. Okay, here we go. The first one is fast and pray. So, a map. So if we think of a map, it's an extremely important tool. It's kind of a small, I don't know how to read maps, but this map, it's extremely important. Most of us, we use maps on our phone or GPSs. I have a terrible sense of direction. And so, I left the house today to come here, and I just stopped by Walmart. I didn't know where Walmart was, so I put in the address, and Walmart's just down the street. That way? All right, well, whatever. Anyways, so I'm so directionally challenged that I use my maps on my phone all the time to literally go anywhere. Actually, getting out of Walmart, I did type in Richpoint, and then I felt dumb because it was 2 minutes away. But it's fine. But when you're using a map like this, there is a few key things that are super important that you need to know when looking at it. I don't know if you guys know this because I didn't. I had to look it up. But you need to know the scale of the map. So 1 inch on the map equals so many miles in the real world or whatever, right? Or 1 centimeter on the map equals, whatever. Anyway, so that's the scale. You need to know the scale of the map. That's important. Stop laughing at me, you old person. Golly. Get out of here. What? Hey, calm down. Crowd control. All right. So you need to know what the certain lines mean, the colored lines on here, dotted lines. This one just has state lines and rivers. But you need to know what those lines are. You need to know the key features on a map, like whether this is a house or a mountain. I didn't know that. But anyways, you need to know which way is north. And you need to know how to hold the map the right way. So up is north on all maps. I just learned that. Cool. Okay, we didn't have to read a map in high school. Get out of here. Listen, calm down. I'm not going to be a what are those people called who study landscapes? I don't know. Anyways, we're going to move on. So, it takes time, at least for me, to be able to learn how to read a map. It will take time. If I were to plan a road trip with my friend using a map, it would take time and dedication for me to learn how to get from Oklahoma City up to Chicago, Illinois. Not on this one, because this one only has rivers. But in a normal map, it would take me time. See, you don't have a blue line that tells you which lane to be in whenever you're using the map. You don't have, a warning that says construction is ahead when you're using these maps. You don't have any of that. So it would take time. It would take dedication. You would have to actually look at it and learn how to use it instead of listening. But it's just like it takes time and dedication to fast and pray. It takes time and dedication to fast and pray to be able to successfully navigate your spiritual life. We read Nehemiah 1, and that's when we hear the bad news about the wall. We read that last week. He mourned and he wept for his people. He had no protection around the city, but he kept fasting and praying. So fasting is a voluntary abstinence from something good, usually food. Usually food. I think there's a social media fast that's been kind of popular lately. I've never done one, but usually it's food. Also, I think it's okay to note that if you're fasting from a sin, it's not actually fasting. It's just not sinning, right? So one time, I'm going to tell a story. I tried to do that last semester in college. I tried fasting from chocolate milk, but like chocolate milk obviously isn't a sin. But when it's free 24/7 at your college, I abused it like a sin. I tell you what, it was a bad deal. So I had to fast from chocolate milk. That was pretty bad. Don't put me on the spot like that. Well, I fasted from amount of chocolate milk, okay? I didn't fast completely from chocolate milk. I was like, maybe I should fast for only 2 chocolate milks a day instead of 10. Don't laugh at me. So, a few examples. We're going to look at a few examples of fasting in the Bible. The first one, I think it's extremely important to note that Moses fasted for 40 days. What? What's going on? Is there something I don't know about? Chris, calm down. You do that. You do that. You have a good time, Chris. We love you too. So, I'm watching you, Chris. I don't believe you. So, we're at a few examples of fasting. We're going to talk about Moses, the first one. So Moses fasted before receiving the commandments. He fasted for 40 days. And when you take it at face value, a 40-day fast seems pretty miraculous, if not pretty terrible. 40 days. And it says in Deuteronomy 9:9 that he did not eat food or drink any water. What Moses teaches us about fasting is that it takes a certain amount of dedication to fast. Fasting takes dedication. It takes a tremendous amount of dedication, especially if you're doing it for 40 days. Then we're going to talk about Paul. So Paul's conversion from Saul to Paul, he fasted. Paul, formerly Saul, was met by God on the road to Damascus, where he encountered God in a life-changing... I'm going to move this. It's kind of distracting me. In a life-changing way, to where he saw an extremely bright light, and that would be God. It left Paul blind for the next 3 days. He also didn't eat or drink on these days. This could have been because of repentance, but he fasted for 3 days. So the number one thing I think we can take away from Paul's fast is that it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be super miraculous in 40 days or super hard. It could be a 3-day fast. So the last person we're going to look at is Jesus, obviously. So in Matthew 4, we learn that Jesus was tempted by Satan, and before he started his public ministry, he fasted for 40 days. By reading Matthew 4:1, we can understand that Jesus was led into the wilderness for the purpose of being tempted by Satan. Though he was physically weak and hungry, Jesus was spiritually well prepared for what he had to endure. I believe that one of the many things we can take away from Jesus' fast, and you can take a ton away, but one of the many things is that it has to be spirit-led in order to be spirit-fulfilling. So the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness, into this fast, and it has to be Spirit-led in order to be Spirit-fulfilling. So the 3 things I want you guys to take away from fasting is, 1, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional and dedicated to your fast. 2, it doesn't have to be some extreme, miraculous fast. It can be short and mild. It can be a short road trip from Wichita to Newton. It could be a short fast. It doesn't have to be super long. And the last one, it has to be Spirit-led in order to be Spirit-fulfilling. So, fasting and prayer can restore or strengthen your intimacy with God. Fasting and prayer can help us hear God more clearly, which is why we see such an intimate relationship between Nehemiah and God. So the next category I want to talk about is probably my favorite one. I call it the flare prayer. Now, I wish Kyle would have let me have an actual flare, but he didn't because of fire reasons or whatever, I guess. I don't really know. I was kind of bummed. Thought about asking for forgiveness, but I also didn't want to burn the church down. So I call these the flare prayers, and we touched on this a little bit last week when I discussed my baseball career and how my coach taught me that not all prayers need to be super long. Some prayers can be, seconds, 30 seconds. Flares by themselves are an extremely important safety device that is used in many situations. As you guys may know, they can be used in the woods. If it's getting late and you're lost and you don't know where you are, you can shoot up a flare and someone will hopefully find you. But I think the most popular usage of a flare would be if you're stranded at sea. We hear stories all the time about people who were stranded at sea in a lifeboat and they sent up a flare and someone saved them, hopefully. So a flare is similar to a firecracker, except a flare is designed to communicate a much more direct message of emergency. So these flares are made bright enough to work in both day and night. These flares are created to send a signal of distress and a call to action. So when Nehemiah was talking to the king about his answer, the king was like, "What do you want me to do about your situation?" Nehemiah, as we learned last week, sent up a flare prayer. Sent up a really short prayer to God. It doesn't say what he prayed, but Scripture says, and he prayed to God, and then he answered his question. There are so many situations where I find myself in that I have to send up a flare prayer. Most of them happened during the garage sale. Most of my flare prayers, Chris, calm down back there. Okay. Most of my flare prayers consisted of, God, help me have self-control. God, help me not blow up on this person. God, give me patience for Kyle. Anyways, though that was most of my flare prayers there. So flare prayers throughout the day are a great way to stay in constant communication with God. They're also a great habit to get into. Constant communication is so important when it comes to your prayer life. So the last one that I want to talk about is called a battle prayer. So we're going to look at Nehemiah's battle prayer here in Nehemiah 4:4-5. It says, "Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sin from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of these builders." Now, this prayer was prayed when Nehemiah and the building crew were approached by two men. One of them, I think I'm saying these right, I don't actually know, Sanballat, right? Sure. Sanballat, and the other one was Tobiah. Sanballat was a Horonite. Anyways, I'm educated, I promise. And Tobiah was an Ammonite. So both of these knights were driven out by God from the promised land for the Israelites. So when they heard that Nehemiah was building this wall, they were furious. As a matter of fact, they threatened to keep Jerusalem in ruins. In response to this, Nehemiah prayed to God not to forget or overlook their sin or guilt. When they kept building the wall, Sanballat and Tobiah were furious and continued to plot a fight against Jerusalem. So it says in verse 9, "We prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night." He later made it, I have one here, he later made it so every person, oh, this is a heavy sword. Hang on a second, I just got to show you guys something. This is listen, shh. Yeah, it is Kyle's sword, calm down. Shh. Did you guys hear that? I'll do it again. Don't worry. I'll try and make it louder. Yeah, it's not that sharp. Well, it's kind of sharp, actually. Okay. Okay, anyways. That kind of sounded cool. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. You guys better be careful up here.
Oh, hi.
Hey, buddy. So, I also got to learn how to click the clicker here. It's not that sharp. Calm down out there. I know what I'm doing. So, in Nehemiah 4:15 through 18, we read, when our enemies heard that we knew of their plans and that God had frustrated them, we all returned to our work on the wall. But from then on, only half of my men worked, while the other half stood guard with spears, shields, bows, coats of mail. The leaders stationed themselves behind the people of Judah who were building the wall. The laborers carried on their work with one hand supporting their load and one hand holding a weapon. All the builders had a sword belted to their side. So I want to share something with you guys as we're kind of coming to an end. Our enemies, unlike Nehemiah's situation, our enemies may not be human. Our enemies may not even be physical. Nehemiah's enemies were human, and they were planning to ruin the wall. Our enemies may not be human. Our enemies may not even be physical. Our enemies could just be our circumstances. Our enemies could just be our thoughts, our situations, our anxieties, our laziness, our family life. Our enemies don't have to be human. But whatever your enemies are, whatever enemies you have, their plans, your enemies' plans, have been frustrated by God, just like Nehemiah's enemies. Therefore, you'll need to stand ready for what comes next. So after Nehemiah's plans were frustrated, or after Nehemiah's enemies' plans were frustrated by God, Nehemiah took a stand. He said, half of you guys on the wall, half of you guys with swords, everyone will carry a weapon. They had to stand ready for what was next. They had one hand on the shovel, and they had one hand on the sword. You see your enemy, and you pray to God. You see your enemy, and you pray to God. And then you stand ready for what's next. Your trouble, your enemy, will look very specific to you. Whatever you're going through, your circumstance, whatever your enemy is, it will look very specific to you. Oh, sorry. So in Nehemiah 6, we find out, as I stated before, that the wall was finished within 52 days. But even with the wall finished, people continued to show opposition towards these Israelites. And the same is going to be true for you. You'll make it through whatever enemies you're facing, but you're still going to come across opposition. Nevertheless, you still have to be ready for what comes next. So how are you going to deal with your enemy? How are you going to deal with this fork in the road whenever you see your enemy? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to fight this battle? So, just like last week, if you guys were here, I want to take a minute or two for us to end in prayer. But instead of finding a friend, what I want to do is I want you guys to find a spot in this room, anywhere. I want you to pray by yourself. I want you to pray by yourself. I want you to spend time in prayer on your knees about this enemy that is in front of you. Ask God to show you guidance on how to handle the situation. Ask Him to prepare your heart for what comes next. Ask Him to make your heart ready for the opposition that is coming. Ask Him to help you pick up your shovel and your sword to be able to keep doing the work for the kingdom through these negative feedbacks. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up now. We're going to spend about 3 to 4 minutes in prayer. I'll close this out, and then we'll end with worship. So I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to find a spot in the room.